Welcome to Be Hero Fights. I'm Tom,
And I'm Brian.
and we are here to discuss
Or Fuss.
over things new
Things trending.
or things to come.
Giggity. Anyhow, guys, last couple of weeks we've been talking Spider-Man. So I think we're going to continue with that trend here.
Last week we actually talked about the Matrix.
Yes.
But before that we had 2 weeks of Spider-Man, and we do want to do one more because neither of us really felt like we finished saying what we wanted to say, and we wanted to dive more into the character. This is not going to be so much of a debate as much of a discussion, a deeper dive into the archetypes and the character of Spider-Man himself.
Exactly. So to start off with on this, we'll do a quick rundown of who Spider-Man is. If you don't know, I don't know why you're watching, but honestly,
How did you find this?
right? Spider-Man, as I mentioned before, is on my top 3 of favorite comic book characters of all time. Usually, he's my number 1. It depends on the comic book I'm reading. And I love everything that's been done since he was originally created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, way back when in the 60s. Okay, he was essentially a foil to Robin. Um, so during the time of the 60s, um, or even slightly before that, when they had Batman and Robin, and then later on Superboy and DC, they had a lot of comic book characters that were coming in to aim towards the young kids, the young readers who are between 8 and 15. And they were trying to do a bunch of stuff like that. Uh, And Stan Lee thought of having, instead of it being a sidekick, having it be a primary character, someone that's going through high school and having to develop not just through puberty, but with super abilities, right? And that's where Peter Parker came from. It's part of also one of the big alliteration things that Stan Lee did because Peter Parker. Um, Side tangent. You know the reason why he always does those alliterations is, or did those alliterations, is at the time he was the editor, right? So he was managing a ton of different comic books at any one time. So he'd had the Fantastic Four with Reed Richards and Sue Storm and everybody else. So to be able to keep straight who he was talking about and what story, he wanted to do the alliteration. So as soon as he remembered the first name, he'd almost always remember the second name. Side tangent. Um, but with Peter Parker was a very nerdy kid on a going through school, being bullied constantly and everything else. And on a freshman school trip that he took to, originally it was just a random named uh, science lab. And later on, it was retconned to be Oscorp, but originally it was just a regular science lab. He was bitten by a radioactive spider. And after being bitten, he woke up the next day after going through the worst version of COVID ever. He came out with the ability of sticking to walls, superhuman strength. Spider senses were actually originally part of this. It came later with the Spidey sense. And then he was, because he's a genius. And I say he's like top level in the Marvel universe. Peter Parker is in the top 10 or top 5 of the most intelligent people in the world.
Yeah.
But
I don't
he's
know his
always,
rank, but I know that he did outsmart Iron Man in the Civil War comic book arc. He was
well,
that's something.
yeah. And like I said, he's in one of the most intelligent people in the world. Even Reed Richards, who is generally considered the smartest person in the world, has talked about how his intelligence is untapped. Um, he was able to make his spider fluid and do the spider shooters and everything out with the thwip and everything. And for those who don't know, the reason that you do the thwip like this with your hands, like this, is not because he's a rock fan, but it's dealing with
He's just a lover.
right. It's dealing with pressure. So he has a pressure system that reaches to the this web shooter, and this puts a different kind of pressure than a fist does, or grabbing on something. So this pressure is what shoots it out and releases it. Um, so that he doesn't accidentally fire his web shooter out when he punches somebody or he's grabbing onto a web. So, just again, random bits of thing. I'm all
I
about
want to add
Spider-Man.
one quick comment. I will say, out of the 3 iterations of Spider-Man that we have seen in the media, I think Andrew Garfield's was the smartest. I feel like he was the most tech savvy, the most ingenuitive, and I think in a lot of ways the closest to a comic book Spider-Man intellect that
I,
we've gotten in the media.
I agree to an aspect. I think what they've done with Tom Holland's MCU Spider-Man, he has that intellect, but they don't push on it enough. Because you have to remember, he was part of the mathletics team in the first one. Um,
Yeah.
he does his own Iron Man scene essentially in the second movie, right? And then he uses geometry in his head to stop Doctor Strange, spoiler warning, in the new movie. So his intelligence is there. I think that they just add more aspect to it in the Andrew Garfield one.
You're right. I guess the reason why I came up with that conclusion is just because a lot of what Spider-Man has was gifted by Iron Man. Yes, it does. Even in the first Spider-Man movie, show him. Was it in that, or was it in Civil? It was in Civil War. Uh, Building computers right
Yeah.
from scratch from dumpster garbage. It shows that, but then it just shows him being gifted all this really amazing stuff, and so yeah, it was very easy for me to forget that, like, yes, he still is very smart, and yes, it does show that in the newest Spider-Man movie, but it still felt like he was kind of just walking on the technology that was handed to him, whereas Andrew Garfield, more so than the other two, I feel like really created crazy tech
Yeah, yeah,
from nothing.
I agree. Like where the Tom Holland and even to an aspect, Tobey Maguire had resources that they could reach out to for tech stuff. Like he could, Tobey Maguire could reach out to Harry or Norman in the first 2 movies to be able to ask for assistance if he needed something like that. Where Andrew Garfield didn't have really any of that. Even when he befriends Harry Osborn, they hadn't seen each other in decades by that point. So it's not like he can go see him. They weren't hanging out all the time. So Andrew Garfield had to do everything on his own, which comes back to 2 episodes ago where we need to make another Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movie. Um, but with that being said, through the creation of Spider-Man, we got something that we don't normally get in a superhero movie. And that is a special kind of archetype. Before I jump into what archetype he has, Tom, explain the archetypes you can have in heroes.
So there's many, and I would dare say the most common that people see is the warrior archetype. Um, Captain America, perfect example. Wolverine, even the Hulk. We're talking about people that their job is to complete a mission. Their job is to win, no matter the cost. Minimize collateral damage, but make sure that they win so that future collateral damage doesn't exist. Spider-Man, on the other hand, well, I guess we'll get into that. So we have the warrior archetype. And of course, we know of the anti-hero, the
Yep.
person that's vengeful, the person that has a personal vendetta, a personal thing, and it doesn't really matter what the collateral is, whether it's large or small. Doesn't matter about the future and the past. Only thing that matters is that personal vendetta. Um, you also have healers. Um, I'm trying to suddenly now my brain is spacing. Healers would be like Jean Grey before the Phoenix shenanigans. She is very much a healer. Um, uh, that's why she has such a strong connection with Scott. That's why in the X-Men movie she also connects very strongly with Logan. There are also the healer archetypes. There is, there's a handful. There is one archetype though that seems to be the most rare. Um, and that, as I said before 2 weeks ago, is the archetype of the savior. And a savior is someone who it doesn't matter the mission. The savior saves the individual. It doesn't matter if the villain gets away. It's better to save someone in distress, to save someone about to die, than to stop the villain. And Spider-Man fits this better than any other superhero.
Yep. Yeah, I very much agree. In this, his dealing with his loss and knowing that losing his uncle Ben uh was due to his inability of stepping up and doing the right thing has driven him to do everything he can, no matter what the reasoning is, to save as many as he can. Right. So we see this as a great example in Spider-Man: Homecoming, where the Vulture is really defeated him, right? Has destroyed him, and Spider-Man can easily just lay down and be like, "I tried to stop you. You're going to kill yourself now because this thing's going to explode. That's on you," right? He could have easily done that. The warrior types, or especially the anti-hero types, would have easily let that happen because the mission would have been completed, which is stopping the Vulture. But the savior archetype in Spider-Man goes and nearly kills himself by repeatedly being beaten down to save the Vulture from himself, really. Um, and you see that again in other aspects. You saw that with Tobey Maguire Spider-Man with Doc Ock. Doc Ock has been beating him, and Tobey Maguire Spider-Man saves him. You see that in the comic books repeatedly. Spider-Man is the one that tries to save everyone, including the villains, from themselves more often than not. He tries to find a way to win without losing anyone. And it may be a thing that he can't, but it happens. He's even gotten flack and respect from heroes in the Marvel universe of all kinds. Wolverine and him have had many a conversation about Wolverine, who's kind of a warrior anti-hero mix. He has talked about, these people are bad, they can't be saved, you should let them go, or take them out. Spider-Man's like, no man, anybody could be saved. Everyone's got an Uncle Ben, essentially, and tries to save people. Captain America has talked about how he wishes he could be like him, in the comics before, saying that he wishes he could be able to uh, have that desire to try and save everyone. And to an aspect, Captain America is very close to being that savior type, especially the version, different, whoever the different writers are. That he kind of bounces back between a warrior and a savior stereotype or archetype. Um, but Spider-Man almost always is. He so in a great run that they did was called Craven's Last Hunt, right? Craven the Hunter is dying, and he's doing essentially his last hunt is to go after Spider-Man. And once Spider-Man finds out that he's dying, Spider-Man goes out of his way to try and save him. Even though that Craven's trying to kill him, he's trying to save him. He is saved. Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, Doc Ock, and everybody else. So we have the Superior Spider-Man, right? The run that happened where uh, Doc Ock becomes Spider-Man only happens because Peter Parker Spider-Man goes to see Doc Ock on his deathbed to essentially be there for him and to comfort him and be like, I understand, Doc, that this was, this is what you felt like you had to do, but there was still good in you, kind of thing. And that's when Doc uses it against him to switch their consciousness and becomes a superior Spider-Man. And then if Peter, even as a consciousness, when he eventually comes back, uses that to allow it, uh, have Doc Ock redeem himself at the end to, you know, uh, give back Peter his body, but also to, redeem himself before he passes. Spider-Man, and this is just because I'm a fanboy, is literally the epitome of a hero. A hero is not a person that chooses the life to save. A hero is a person that will put their life up to save everyone.
And I want to add on to that. One of the bigger reasons why Spider-Man is always shown to be a young kid. It's very common, not just throughout storytelling, but throughout the world, for people to just think of, late teens, early college, like they're naive.
Yeah.
They don't understand how the world works. And so everyone places these judgments on young people that are trying to make the world a better place, from a jaded perspective. And so Spider-Man has always been written from a late high school to early college person, for the most. I mean, sure there are arcs later, but for the most part, late high school, early college. We're talking about someone who wants to prove himself, that wants to be a force for good in the world, that wants to use everything that he can to do better for everyone. Someone that has felt pain, that has felt loss to a degree that very few people do until their middle aged years. They're later on in life. He has felt it all to the most extreme degree, and that has allowed him to have the most compassion out of anyone. I
Yeah.
can't think of another Marvel superhero that is more compassionate than Spider-Man. We're talking about in the Maximum Carnage series. Uh Venom could have killed Carnage and Shriek. They finally, and after both of them had nearly destroyed Spider-Man and Black Cat and so many of them, right? Cloak and Dagger. Carnage and his team nearly killed all of them. And when they finally, after like 13 issues or something, they finally take down Carnage and Shriek and Doppelganger and all them, uh, and Venom's about to kill him, and Spider-Man won't let him. He is compassionate. It is more important to be a savior. It is more important to let people grow, to let people learn, to give people that chance. Now, yes, there are other heroes that are close. I would dare say the Flash is a close. He is very often in the savior, but he's just as much of a warrior. Batman in the early, 60s, 70s, 80s was, but nowadays he's just a warrior. Spider-Man is really the true savior archetype throughout comicdom. I dare anyone to challenge
I mean, and I agree. Like the suffrage that Spider-Man has gone through in a young age, losing both of his parents, and then his father figure and Uncle Ben, and then later on in the comics, Aunt May dies, and he loses Gwen Stacy, and then constantly putting people in danger with MJ. His, going back to Doc Ock, Doc Ock at different points was a friend, a mentor, and a step uncle because Aunt May and Doc Ock were gotten married. When Doctor Octavius, became good again, his best friend turns on him. His best friend's father turns on him in some of the worst ways possible. Right, at one aspect in the comics, uh, it was done where not only did they find out that Gwen didn't die, that she'd had two kids with Norman Osborn, which just tore out Spider-Man's heart, essentially. I mean, it was later on found that it was clones and yada yada yada. But
you.
yeah, comic books. But uh it was like he's gone through so much suffrage and yet he will not uh to if he can do it, will not take a life and will try to do what he can to save people. Right? It's 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 an innate ability to him. Um, in the runs, there have been so many times where he's the one to put up as the leader. He's the one to be the one to make the moral judgment because he's the one that will always choose the side of right, the side of good, and will not compromise. Right. This I mentioned this before, but one of my favorite lines in any comic book is in Civil War, and it is Captain America. He's actually talking to I want to say he's talking to Spider Man, but I can't remember for sure. But he says, you know, and this is right after everyone's trying to give him the sign, the registration acts, and everything else, and he's like, no, sometimes you have to stand uh, up against the river of truth, no matter who's throwing at you, yelling at you. If the world is yelling at you and saying, move, you need to stand by the river of truth like a tree and say, no, you move. That is a great line. And that's a great example of what a savior, and in this case, Spider Man, is. He doesn't care the reasoning behind a thing. A life is a life that's worth keeping. And he has suffered so much in his short life, he won't let somebody else suffer like he has. Batman's lost one person, two if you count Jason. Um, really? Well, two people, his parents, and then Jason's three. Uh, Spider-Man's lost so many, and he still fights.
He does. And I don't know, I just feel the need to just say this. It's very common for people to think of the mindset of trying to do the right thing, of doing what's best for everyone, as a weakness, as naive. If you're one of those people that feels like you are labeled as such, if you're doing your best, keep going.
Yeah,
It doesn't
definitely.
matter. Keep pushing. Do what you know is right. Uh, I've been there. I'm sure Brian has.
Oh, so many
That
times.
there are so many times where people want to call you a nice guy. And I don't want to get too much into that, but like if you are doing what you know to be right, uh and you are doing your best despite people calling you naive or silly, do what's right.
And on the back end of that, like, you never know what a person's gone through. You don't know what they're thinking about in their history. They may come with a smile on their face, but you don't know the sadness in the fight they're fighting. Don't be that guy or girl and put somebody down because of it. Though there are multiple archetypes in this world, we should all strive to be that savior archetype. And I'm not dropping the religious thing on there. I'm just saying we all have the ability of choosing to do the right thing. And sadly, not enough of us do. And that's where we should all look to Spider-Man or whatever your religious iconography is. For me, it's usually a pubescent child wearing red and blue and has a spider emblem on his chest. So,
I don't think that's prepubescent. That's definitely during slash post.
well, when he starts, you know.
God. That being said, Brian, are there any other archetypes that I obviously didn't name them all. Is there anything that we should talk about though before we wrap things up today?
Um, Comic books in general bounce a lot between things, and like I said before with Captain America, they bounce between archetypes a lot. Spider-Man is probably the one that stays the most truth to his, but not always. Again, it bounces. That's the archetypes are kind of the core of what that person is, right? So if you look at somebody like MCU Steve Rogers, he will always do the right thing, and he will, no matter what, will always stand up for it and fight all day. I was telling somebody the other day about this. It was a great example. The very end of Endgame, where Steve had just got his butt kicked, even though he picked up Thor's hammer against Thanos. And Thanos does his monologue as Steve is laying down there, and he's talking about how he's going to enjoy destroying this world. And then his whole army comes in, and Steve gets up, tightens his straps, and keeps going. He could have easily said his tagline for the MCU, which is "I can do this all day," but he didn't need to. Right? He got up and he showed you with his action by being that person that goes there. With archetypes, you can do that without having to use a catchphrase. You know, going in that Spider Man's going to try and save everybody because that's his archetype, right? You know that Batman's going to go in as a warrior and do what he needs to complete his mission. Uh, so with those archetypes, you have a basis for an expectation, which sometimes gets subverted, but most of the time stays true. It's not a bad thing by any means, but it's a rarity when you have a staunch savior like Spider-Man. I think that's what makes him so special in the world of comics.
Yeah. And I just want to say one more thing about archetypes. One of the big reasons why archetypes are even a thing, and this comes from ancient storytelling, is archetypes are really ways that we can connect with stories. The villains, the anti-heroes, the saviors, the warriors, the common citizens. There's so many. Archetypes are how we connect. Humans are complex. We experience a full range. All of us are villains in someone's story and heroes in another. uh we experience so much, so the archetypes help us to project ourselves into something else, and learn and grow. And I think that's the beautiful thing about the entire concept of storytelling, at least in this fashion. Spider-Man, I think, is the ultimate goal of what we all want, strive to be like. The savior archetype, someone who is damn near perfect. um but there is times where you need to be a warrior, and there is times where you're going to be vindictive, and you need to learn from that. And sometimes it's better to learn from a story than from actually experiencing it. And sometimes we are villains, and sometimes to wake us up out of it, we have to experience that through someone else's eyes, through another perspective. Keep that in mind. That's one reason why I love storytelling. And that's one reason why I think Spider-Man is just one of the most amazing heroes ever.
Pun intended. um, but guys, let us know what you think. Drop a comment down here on YouTube if you're on here, or hit us up on our social medias. Tell us what you think of Spider-Man. If you think he's a savior archetype, if he's another kind of archetype, or if he's something completely different. Let us know how
Or
you
if you
feel
have a
about that.
favorite story from any of his archetypes.
Yeah, exactly. So let us know what your guys' thoughts are. Hit us up on social media, such as
Facebook.com/BeHeroMedia, Instagram.com/BeHeroMedia.
on Twitter at BeHeroMedia, and everything that is BeHeroMedia at BeHeroMedia.com. Also, don't forget while you're here, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you know the next time we drop a great episode of Be Hero Media right here, or one of our other ones like Heroes Play. And then on social media, stay tuned and subscribe to those so you know when we drop another great episode of any of our other shows like Sheroes, the Bump Card, or any of the other ones.
Exactly. Thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate your viewership and all the support you've given us over the last year and a half ish. Uh, we love you so much. Thank you
Yeah.
again. Want to sign us off, Brian?
Yes, I will. So, guys, as always, go out there and be a
Be a
hero.
hero.